During the Soviet Union's darkest political moments, state broadcasters weaponized a single ballet.
Swan Lake played repeatedly on screens across an entire nation.
Millions watched in a trance. This wasn't entertainment. It was psychological warfare.
In the 1980s and 1990s, something strange happened in Soviet and post-Soviet television.
Whenever a major political crisis erupted, Swan Lake would suddenly flood the airwaves. Not just once. Repeatedly. 4 hours.
The ballet would loop endlessly while power struggles unfolded behind closed doors.
Citizens noticed the pattern but didn't understand it. They were confused. Anxious. Some felt strangely calm watching the familiar movements.
The repetition created a hypnotic effect.
Psychologists call this response regulation through predictability. When chaos surrounds you, your brain seeks patterns. It craves order. Swan Lake provided that order. The state knew this.
They weaponized it intentionally.
This wasn't accidental programming.
Every broadcast was calculated. Every loop served a purpose.
The audience was being conditioned without their knowledge or consent.
They were experiencing mass psychological manipulation in real time.
The choice of Swan Lake wasn't random. This ballet carries deep cultural weight in Russian society. It represents beauty, tradition, and national pride. Citizens grew up with it.
They associated it with stability and continuity.
Using Swan Lake meant the state could tap into existing emotional attachments. The human brain processes familiar content differently than new information. It requires less cognitive effort.
When your mind is relaxed and in this lower processing state, you become more susceptible to suggestion.
More open to accepting narratives without questioning them. Swan Lake's hypnotic music and repetitive movements create a meditative state. Scientists studying this phenomenon found that rhythmic patterns actually synchronize brainwaves. Your neural activity matches the tempo.
This is why mantras work.
Why chants work.
Why this ballet worked. The state used ancient psychological principles wrapped in high art.
Citizens couldn't accuse the government of manipulation. What could be more innocent than ballet?
Yet the sophistication of this strategy was brilliant. It exploited both emotion and neurobiology simultaneously. When Swan Lake appeared on screens, it served multiple functions at once. First, it filled airtime with something that prevented alternative information from spreading.
No news broadcasts. No analysis. No competing narratives. Just Swan Lake.
Second, it created a shared experience across the entire nation. Millions were watching the same thing simultaneously.
This synchronized public consciousness.
It made citizens feel connected while preventing them from organizing resistance.
Third, and most crucial, it signaled to the population that something was wrong. People recognized the pattern. When Swan Lake appeared, they knew crisis was happening.
But the ballet's soothing nature prevented panic.
Fear was neutralized through aesthetic beauty.
The state had discovered the perfect tool.
It wasn't violent. It wasn't obviously propagandistic.
It was a cultural artifact that made people feel they were being treated with respect.
Their government wasn't talking down to them.
They were being offered art during difficult times. This psychological sleight of hand was masterful.
The audience remained calm, compliant, distracted.
And the power structures behind the scenes remained unquestionable.
This Soviet technique didn't die with the Soviet Union. The principles underlying it are timeless. They work on human neurology.
Modern governments and media corporations use evolved versions of this strategy constantly.
They don't use ballet anymore. They use algorithms.
Streaming platforms create recommendation loops that keep you watching similar content endlessly.
Your brain enters the same hypnotic state. You're being conditioned just as effectively. Social media feeds function identically. Infinite scrolling. Repetitive content. Familiar formats. Your sense of time dissolves. Hours pass. You've absorbed countless narratives without actively processing them. During political crises today, media outlets employ the same fundamental strategy.
They overwhelm channels with repetitive coverage of preferred narratives.
Alternative information gets drowned out.
The public consciousness synchronizes around the dominant story. Your emotional response is carefully managed through the selection of images, music, and language.
It's Swan Lake for the digital age. The weaponization of familiarity. The control of attention. The conditioning of public psychology.
Understanding how the Soviets used ballet makes these modern manipulations visible.
Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Awareness is the only true defense against these tactics. The Soviet ballet strategy reveals something uncomfortable about human psychology. We are vulnerable. Our brains can be manipulated through repetition, aesthetics, and emotional resonance. This isn't a weakness unique to Soviets or past generations. It's a universal feature of how human consciousness works. The question isn't whether you can be manipulated. The question is whether you're aware you're being manipulated. The Soviets were honest about their methods internally. Communist theory openly discussed the use of culture as a tool of state power. They didn't hide it from their own leadership. They just hid it from the population. Today's approach is more insidious. The manipulation happens invisibly. You're told you have free choice. You're told algorithms are neutral. You're told media is independent.
These narratives obscure the reality of systematic psychological influence. Recognizing these patterns in your own media consumption is the first step toward independence.
Notice when you're drawn into loops. Notice when information is being repeated to you. Notice when your emotional state is being managed. Notice when alternatives aren't being presented. These observations are your defense. Consciousness is resistance. Understanding becomes power.
You've just discovered how entire nations were psychologically controlled through art. This knowledge changes how you see media forever.
Drop a like if this shifted your perspective. Subscribe for more hidden psychology. Your free psychology guide is in the bio. Share this with someone who needs to see it.